My fiance's childhood sweetheart just got back from overseas, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit and driving a flashy Porsche. He had the nerve to talk big right in front of our wedding planning agency. He straight up declared that she belonged to him, and this is happening exactly 3 days before our wedding. I casually shelled a peanut, shot my mom a text, and told her not to freak out if some jerk caused a massive scene at the ceremony. My future bride has a seriously fiery temper, and honestly, I'm mostly just worried she might accidentally put this guy in the hospital. The blazing June sun beat down relentlessly, baking the red carpet laid out by the main entrance. I was squatting down next to the reception desk, just happily munching on my peanuts. While checking off the reception seating chart, I reached the very end of the list and noticed table 17 was missing a name card. I figured my Aunt Sarah had sneakily squeezed her new dance squad onto the guest list again. Oh, right then my phone buzzed. It was my buddy Zach. "Hey, what's up?" I answered quietly. "Bro, we have a massive problem." Zach's voice spiked, sounding completely, utterly panicked. "Julian is back." I casually tossed a peanut shell into a nearby trash can and replied like it was no big deal. "Yeah, I know. That's it? Just, yeah?" A huge crash came from the other end of the line. From the sound of it, Zach had literally fallen out of his chair in a total panic. "Dude, that is your fiance's childhood sweetheart. The one that got away. The guy who grew up with her. He flew all the way back from overseas just to stop this." I remained completely unfazed. "I know. Man, these peanuts are actually pretty amazing. You want some?" "Bro, I am losing my freaking mind over here. And you're asking if I want peanuts?" Zach let out a heavy, exhausted sigh. It took him a solid minute to calm down before he kept talking. He just posted on social media. His location tag is right next to the exact wedding planning agency you're at. The caption says, "Some people were born to be mine." Still chewing on my peanut, I calmly gave my review. Wow, that caption is incredibly cringy. Now is definitely not the time to be roasting his captions. Before Zach could even finish his sentence, a sudden, incredibly distinct, guttural roar of a sports car engine echoed from outside. The driver deliberately revved the engine and let off the gas, flexing as if he was terrified people might actually miss his ridiculously expensive ride. I stood up and brushed the peanut crumbs off my pants. Looking up, I watched a silver-gray Porsche Cayenne pull up right in front of the main entrance. The harsh sunlight reflecting off its polished body was practically blinding. I squinted slightly as the car door slowly swung open. First, a pair of exquisite, custom handmade leather shoes hit the pavement, followed by sharp, slim-fit suit pants. Finally, a perfectly tailored, crisp suit jacket came into view, flawlessly accentuating his tall, broad frame. Julian stepped out of the car. His every single move radiated a carefully rehearsed, dramatic elegance. 5 years had passed, and that once awkward kid had completely transformed. Now, he was standing at an impressive 6'1", with incredibly sharp, striking facial features. His broad shoulders and narrow waist filled out that designer suit absolutely perfectly. Honestly, he was undeniably good-looking, just posing there in the sun. He looked as eye-catching as a fashion magazine cover model, well, except for his meticulously slicked-back hair. He had clearly slapped on way too much hair gel, making the whole style look incredibly stiff and wildly overdone. He dramatically pulled off his sunglasses and casually glanced over at the cars parked by the entrance. There was a cheap, beat-up work van, an electric commuter trike, and finally, his eyes landed on my car, a 6-year-old, totally worn-out Honda Civic. His gaze lingered on my junker for a long, heavy moment. There wasn't any outright mockery in his eyes, but instead, a deeply condescending sense of pity. Judging solely by our rides, this guy had already convinced himself that he had won the war. I finished off the last peanut in my hand and looked right up at him as he approached. His expensive leather shoes clicked sharply against the pavement as he strolled over to me. His steps were steady and deliberate, radiating a totally unearned sense of superiority. He stopped exactly 3 paces in front of me. His arrogant eyes traveled from top to bottom, slowly scanning me from head to toe. I was rocking a faded gray t-shirt that was starting to pill, and my pant legs were covered in dust from crouching on the floor all morning. To top it off, I had a casual pair of house slippers on my feet. My completely casual, totally unbothered appearance clearly gave him a massive, ego-stroking boost of confidence. "So, you're Gavin?" Without even waiting for an answer, he confidently stuck out his hand to introduce himself. I'm Julian, her childhood sweetheart. I casually took up the conversation, keeping my cool. Oh, I know. She's definitely mentioned you before. Julian's smug expression shifted slightly. Oh? And what exactly did she say about me? I looked at him. She said you bolted overseas without a single word back then, without even bothering to say goodbye. I tilted my head slightly, my tone remaining completely flat and uninterested. To be completely honest, she still holds a massive grudge over it. The arrogant, confident smile on his face instantly froze for a fraction of a second. A moment later, he forced a fake, carefree shrug. We were just young and foolish, that's all. Some deep, meaningful bonds can never be easily washed away by time. You're totally right. They can't. I agreed, nodding along. After all, even to this very day, she still flies into a blinding rage the second she even sees your name. That kind of burning anger is definitely hard to erase. Julian's face instantly soured, deliberately dodging the subject. He turned to look inside the wedding planning company, gazing at the festive decorations and piles of wedding candy scattered everywhere. A wedding in 3 days. The family elders insist on throwing a massive party. Personally, I think keeping it simple and just getting a marriage certificate is more than enough. He flashed another patronizing, holier-than-thou smile and took a few steps closer. The heavy scent of his woody cologne hit me like a brick wall. It was strong enough to make me choke. Gavin, I won't beat around the bush with you. She was always meant to be mine. His eyes locked onto mine, his voice dripping with absolute certainty. A brief silence fell over the area. The only sounds left were the workers moving tables and chairs inside and the faint honking of cars from the distant street. I looked at him calmly and gave a slight nod. Sure. Julian's face twisted in utter shock. He couldn't believe my reaction. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. I turned around, pulled a folding chair out from under the reception desk, and set it right in the middle of the doorway. If you have what it takes to steal her away, by all means, give it your best shot. I sat down casually, crossed my legs, and pulled another handful of peanuts out of my pocket. I slowly shelled them, sitting back to watch the show unfold. By now, Julian had completely lost his composure. He had prepared a whole speech for a dramatic confrontation and was fully ready to get into a heated argument with me. The one thing he hadn't anticipated was this entirely zen, unbothered attitude of mine. What are you playing at? His brows furrowed deeply, completely baffled. I'm not playing at anything. I looked up at him. If you think you can win Scarlet back, go right ahead. I won't stop you. The final choice has always been entirely up to her. I peeled a peanut and chewed it slowly, adding a friendly piece of advice. But let me give you a tip. Buy some heavy-duty concealer in advance. My girl is incredibly direct when she loses her temper, and she hits hard. Julian's face darkened. He clenched his fist without saying a single word, spun around, and got straight back into his Porsche. He slammed the car door shut and peeled out in a fit of absolute rage. I pulled out my phone and shot her a quick text, letting her know that her old childhood sweetheart was back in the country and had just come looking for trouble. Right as the message sent, her reply came almost instantly. Her tone was completely cold and detached. Whatever he does has nothing to do with me. What are we having for dinner tonight? I couldn't help but chuckle. Hot pot sounds good. Don't forget to buy enoki mushrooms. I still remember you forgot them last time. I leaned back against my chair, looking up at the clear, vast sky. My mind felt completely at peace. Julian would never understand. Once Scarlet sets her mind on someone, she will stay with them faithfully for the rest of her life. Her fiercely protective nature and stubborn personality were far more intense than he could ever imagine. As for my completely ordinary car, it could never be used to measure the depth of a true, heartfelt relationship. Julian's ability to take action was far quicker than I had anticipated. Early the next morning, Zach hurriedly sent me a message telling me that Julian had cornered Scarlet right at her company's front desk. He had even specially prepared a massive bouquet of roses. Attached was a candid photo. Julian was holding 99 premium red roses, standing right in the middle of the company lobby. He was incredibly eye-catching, causing all the young women at the reception desk to turn their heads and stare. I zoomed in on the photo to take a closer look. I immediately recognized them as a high-end imported variety. Counting the wrapping and delivery fees, this single bouquet must have cost well over $4,000. I secretly found it hilarious. When you think about it, this whole situation was truly ironic. 3 years ago, I authorized Zach to investigate some small and medium-sized enterprise investment projects. I took a liking to Brighton Group, which belonged to Julian's father and was facing a severe cash crunch. Under the name of Raystone Capital, I injected $20 million, acquired a significant share, and became their largest external investor. And the hidden founder behind Raystone Capital was none other than me. Zach handled all public-facing operations on my behalf. So, no one in the outside world knew my true identity. Now, Julian was using his company's working capital to splurge extravagantly. In reality, he was spending the very money I had invested to hit on my fiancée. This bizarre, perfect loop was endlessly amusing. Not long after, her phone call came through. Her tone was entirely flat and unbothered. "That idiot is blocking the lobby downstairs. I saw the bouquet. It looks pretty fancy," I teased back. "You still in the mood to joke around? What else am I supposed to do? What? Am I supposed to charge down there in my slippers and throw down?" The other end of the line went dead silent for a second before she murmured softly, "I'll head down and handle it myself." "Hey, don't hit the guy too hard," I warned her. "Don't sweat it," she replied. "I know exactly what I'm doing." I chewed on that for a second and added, "Look, if things get ugly down there, at least don't let those flowers go to waste. Those things cost a fortune. Bring them back up, toss them in a vase, and they'll look amazing." She just sighed. "Gavin, you are completely hopeless." With that, she hung up the phone in a total huff. 40 minutes later, Zach shot over a few screenshots from the security feeds, perfectly capturing the whole drama in the lobby. The expensive roses Julian had been holding were totally trashed, scattered all over the damn floor. All his burning, passionate enthusiasm had amounted to absolutely nothing. Zach even threw in a typed-out transcript of their little chat. She had completely iced him out with just one sentence: "You're too late, and it's not just that you're 5 years late. It's that from the very beginning, you never even belonged in my life." After dropping that bomb, she turned on her heel and walked away without a single backward glance, leaving the massive bouquet right at the front desk. In the end, the reception staff just split them up and took them home. Zach kept geeking out over how insanely chill I was, completely unfazed even with a romantic rival banging on the front door. I just took a breath and slowly broke down my mindset. Honestly, as early as 2 years ago, right after we made things official, she and I had this deep, late-night heart-to-heart over drinks, and she just poured her whole soul out to me. Growing up glued to each other's hips, everyone around them used to endlessly tease that they were a match made in heaven. Over time, she totally fooled herself into thinking that being used to his constant presence meant it was true, earth-shattering love. It wasn't until Julian ghosted her for an overseas trip, leaving her to wait obsessively for a whole year, that she finally snapped awake and buried the past for good. Hitting rock bottom led her to me, and that's when she truly grasped what it meant to fall head over heels and love fiercely. I remember she once looked me dead in the eye and asked, "What's the biggest difference between a habit and deep love?" A habit is when someone walks out, and your chest just feels heavy with sadness and a sense of loss. But when you truly, madly love someone, if they dare to turn their back and walk away, you'll burn the world down to chase after them. By the end of that night, she had snuggled deep into my chest, and with this adorable, almost terrifying bossiness, straight up declared that if the man she loved ever dared to ditch her, she'd personally shatter his kneecaps just to keep him exactly where he belongs. Ever since that talk, I knew in my gut that a guy like Julian couldn't stir up even a drop of real trouble. It wasn't because I'm some hotshot with a flawless background. It's because once Scarlett locks onto something, you couldn't move her an inch, even with a bulldozer. The literal second she decided to put a ring on my finger, Julian's chances plummeted to absolute zero. It didn't matter if he rolled up in sick luxury cars or drowned her in priceless flowers, or even if he sweated blood to craft this flashy, perfect guy image for himself. It was completely useless. He wasn't dealing with a wishy-washy ex-girlfriend. He was going head-to-head with a titanium wall of pure, ride-or-die devotion. A fiercely protective one at that, but Julian's ego blinded him to it. Then, right at 9 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The sender? None other than the golden boy himself, Julian. His message absolutely reeked of arrogant superiority, trying to threaten me by claiming there were things a guy like me just couldn't protect. He actually had the nerve to say Scarlett only settled for me because he was overseas and she was desperate for company. Now that the king had returned, everything was supposedly going back to the good old days. He told me to be a smart boy and back the hell off. I just stared at the text for a hot minute. Then, I casually snapped a screenshot and fired it straight over to Scarlett. Within seconds, she texted back, asking what the hell this was. I let the screenshot do the talking. Almost instantly, my screen lit up with a savage two-word reply. I couldn't help but crack up, tossing my phone onto the nightstand, killing the lights, and crashing out. Outside, the moonlight was cutting through the night sky, sharp and completely crystal clear. What Julian tragically failed to understand was that while he thought he was smoothly winning back an old flame, he was actually sprinting face first into a brick wall. With only 2 days left on the clock before the wedding, the guy decided to totally flip his playbook. He gave up on harassing Scarlett directly and locked his crosshairs onto her mother instead. Honestly, I had to admit it was a dangerously smart move. Scarlett's mom, Eleanor Davis, was 53 years old. Back before she retired, she'd spent her life as an elementary school teacher. These days, with way too much free time on her hands, she lived for her line dancing classes. And her absolute biggest obsession? Her daughter's marriage. In her eyes, my whole setup was completely pathetic. I didn't own a house. I definitely didn't drive a flashy car, and my 9-to-5 was as ordinary as it gets. She was dead, convinced her precious daughter was doomed to a life of misery if she stuck with me. And that bitter regret was something she had always kept bottled up inside. Julian's sudden return, however, struck right at the core of her mother's desperate obsession to see her daughter marry into wealth. Right as I was at home, scrubbing and mopping the floors, my buddy Zach shot me a text. He warned me that Julian had already paid her mother a little house visit. Not only was the guy hauling over pricey wine and cigars, but he also brought along a high-end jewelry box, the exact kind older folks absolutely eat up. It was incredibly obvious he had done his homework beforehand. I recognized the jewelry brand in a single glance. I knew it was the exact style that Mrs. Davis normally fawned over. I stopped mopping, letting the silence sink in. Sitting back on the sofa, I knew exactly what his game was. Julian knew he couldn't win Scarlett over directly, so he decided to worm his way through her family instead. Sure enough, 30 minutes later, Scarlett's call came ringing through. Her voice was completely choked, with a mix of helplessness and sheer fury. She told me Julian had been at her house, buttering up her mother for hours, just endlessly bragging about his fancy overseas education, his experience running his family's empire, and his massive annual paycheck. He had completely brainwashed her mother. Right after he left, her mom started breathing down her neck, arguing that Julian was exceptional in every single way, and given their childhood history, she begged her to seriously rethink our wedding. But Scarlett held her ground right then and there, flat out telling her mom that if anyone pushed her 1 inch further, she would march straight down to the courthouse and marry me that very second, leaving absolutely zero room for compromise. That explosive reaction left her mother feeling incredibly hurt and slighted, sobbing that she was only looking out for her little girl's future. I softly talked an emotional Scarlett off the ledge, casually dropping the fact that those expensive cigars Julian brought over, yeah, they were totally cheap knockoffs. That instantly blew away a massive chunk of her anger. I reassured her that she had nothing to worry about, because normally, even though Mrs. Davis complained constantly about my dead-end background, deep down, she had long accepted me as her son-in-law. Back when I used to pull brutal late shifts and drag myself home in the dead of night, she would quietly leave a warm bowl of soup by the door. Her words were sharp as knives, but in her heart, she genuinely cared about me. She definitely wouldn't try to sabotage things at our wedding. I took the chance to bring up my surprise plans for our post-wedding getaway, which finally helped Scarlett breathe a sigh of relief. We even finalized our dinner plans to cook up some spicy hot and sour fish that very night. In reality, she had absolutely no idea that as early as last month, I had secretly booked a luxury villa with a private pool in the Maldives, complete with a jaw-dropping ocean view, having already mapped out every single second of our dream honeymoon. Right after hanging up, I called Zach and ordered him to pull Brighton Group's financial statements for the last 2 quarters. Zach instantly caught onto my vibe, playfully teasing me about what kind of brutal trap I was setting up this time. I just casually brushed off his jokes and headed straight into the kitchen to prep the ingredients. Julian was burning himself out trying to win over everyone in our orbit, but he completely forgot one thing. True connection and lifelong loyalty can never be bought with cheap, flashy cash. With barely a day and a half left on the clock until our wedding, Julian pulled his next desperate move. He hosted a lavish dinner at an insanely exclusive, upscale restaurant downtown, inviting a massive chunk of Scarlett's old classmates. He threw this grand banquet under the flimsy disguise of an old friend's reunion, specifically extending an invitation to both Scarlett and me. Look, anyone with half a working brain could see that catching up was the absolute last thing on his mind. Instead, he just wanted to use the crowd as his personal audience to humiliate me, comparing us in every possible aspect: family background, education, social skills, and raw style. He wanted to flaunt his shiny superiority in public while subtly grinding my name into the dirt. When Scarlett saw that invite, she was instantly grossed out, flat out refusing to even step foot near him. But I just smiled and nudged her to go with me. It would be a total waste to pass up a free 5-star feast. Plus, it was the absolute perfect chance to grab some popcorn and watch the circus act he'd set up for us. As night finally fell, I walked Scarlett into that private, high-end dining room right on the dot. Julian was already holding court at the head of the table, smoothly flexing his international business adventures to the eager crowd hanging onto his every word. The second he saw us arrive, he addressed me as Mr. Vance with this incredibly cold, overly polite tone, deliberately drawing a giant, invisible line in the sand between us. He wanted to contrast my complete outsider status with his precious childhood intimacy with Scarlett. One ridiculously expensive dish after another hit the table, and while the whole scene looked super lively and harmonious on the outside, there was a toxic, suffocating tension boiling right beneath the surface. Mid-bite, one of Julian's frat buddies casually brought up luxury sports cars, turning with a smirk to ask me what I drove. Upon hearing that, I rocked a beat-up, old Honda Civic. The entire room exchanged painfully awkward glances, sucking all the air straight out of the room. Just as Julian was secretly eating it up, getting ready to play the hero and politely diffuse the tension, Scarlett slowly set down her chopsticks and calmly rose from her seat, instantly dragging every single pair of eyes right onto her. She didn't hold back, quietly and flatly laying out their entire toxic past right in front of everyone. She threw it in his face that when Julian ditched her to go overseas all those years ago, she had waited at the airport for hours on end. Her dozens of desperate texts were met with pure silence, and the guy ghosted her for 5 whole years. Now that he was back and supposedly rolling in cash, he was actually weaponizing their shared history, playing sick comparison games to stroke his fragile ego. He treated real love like a cheap poker chip. With that bombshell dropped, she proudly began sharing the beautiful little things about our life together, gently explaining that sure, my beat-up car was nothing flashy, but I would always make sure to warm up the heater for her ahead of time in the dead of winter. She told them how I put her first in absolutely everything, and how that quiet, rock-solid devotion meant 1,000,000 times more to her than any shallow, materialistic flex. I just sat there with my food hovering midair, listening to the woman I love fiercely defend me with every single breath. My chest swelled with an unbelievable warmth. She proudly told the room that my rented apartment was barely 600 square feet, yet I gave her the master bedroom with the absolute best sunlight, specifically saving the best space in the house just for her, while I spent years crammed into the tiny second bedroom, sleeping on a cheap folding bed. She bragged about what an amazing cook I was, and how I remembered exactly how much she despised cilantro. She said that whenever she fell sick in the middle of the night, I wouldn't hesitate to sprint out into the freezing cold just to fetch her medicine. Scarlett's eyes welled up with tears, but her voice didn't waver for a single second. She declared that this kind of raw, genuine devotion was something his luxury Porsche could never, ever replace. The entire dining room instantly plummeted into a heavy, dead silence. The so-called friend who had been snickering at me earlier hung his head in sheer shame, while the girls who were giggling a second ago frantically raised their glasses to hide their awkward faces. Julian was completely frozen in place, gripping his wine glass so violently that his knuckles turned bone white. Scarlett just grabbed her purse, walked briskly over to my side, and softly whispered that it was time to get out of there. I casually joked that I hadn't even finished the expensive abalone on the table, but she was absolutely determined to leave. I stood up slowly and locked eyes with Julian. His face was a twisted, ugly mask of shame, bitter resentment, and complete humiliation. But I knew the score perfectly well. A little setback like this was never going to be enough to make a guy like him back off. After spending 5 years allegedly living the high life abroad, his fragile ego meant more to him than anything else in the world. Having his pride absolutely crushed in front of his old crew tonight, there was zero chance he'd let this slide. He was definitely going to hunt for payback. Once we made it out to the parking lot, I noticed Scarlett's hands were ice cold and trembling slightly. I reached out and wrapped her hand warmly in mine, calming her nerves. She nervously admitted it was the very first time she had ever called someone out so publicly, and her heart was hammering from the adrenaline rush. She even managed to tease me, asking how I stayed so rock-solid and ridiculously dependable through that whole mess. I just smiled and reached out to pull the passenger side door open for her. Once she slid in, she didn't grab her seatbelt right away. Instead, she leaned back quietly, staring up at the car ceiling. After a long, tense silence, she suddenly turned to me and asked if I was hiding some massive secret from her, while the warm, early summer breeze drifted gently through the cracked window. She pointed out that ever since Julian dragged himself back into town to stir up trouble, my reactions had been way too calm. It just wasn't how a normal guy would handle his girlfriend's wealthy ex showing up. I fired up the engine, letting the old Civic let out its familiar, comforting low rumble, and smoothly told her, I knew exactly how all of this was going to play out from the very beginning, because at the end of the day, the only person you've ever truly chosen is me. Scarlett stared at me in total silence for a few heartbeats, then finally turned her gaze back to the road ahead. You always know exactly the right words to make it absolutely impossible to stay mad at you, she murmured softly. I hit the gas and slowly pulled out of the lot, leaving the glaring lights of the restaurant to fade away in my rearview mirror. Julian was left standing all alone outside the restaurant entrance, his hands shoved deep into his expensive pockets, his dark eyes locked fiercely onto the empty parking space we had just left behind, and trust me, there wasn't a single shred of defeat in his gaze. With only one day left until the big wedding, at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Zach's call came through right on cue, letting me know he had finally dug up all of Brighton Group's financial statements. I casually listened to his explosive report while brushing my teeth in the mirror. Turns out, the mighty company had actually bled out a staggering $37 million just last quarter. With their core businesses stuck in a total death spiral, their cash flow had been on the absolute brink of total collapse for months. There was no way they could hold out much longer. I pushed him on their overseas branches and found out Julian's so-called elite international projects had been an absolute train wreck, completely bottoming out across the board in a desperate bid to keep the company afloat. Things were so incredibly dire that his father had actually mortgaged their own headquarters just to scrape together enough cash to keep the lights on. In a single, satisfying instant, the entire twisted picture became crystal clear to me. Julian's frantic, sudden return to the country wasn't about winning back some lost childhood romance. The cold, hard truth? He was only back to find a lifeline for his family's bankrupt empire. And Zach knew exactly what we had to do next, just as well as I did. Here was the kicker. Our firm, Raystone Capital, was actually the biggest external investor backing the Brighton Group. The second we decided to pull our funding, their whole operation would crumble to dust. I told Zach to hold off and play along. We were going to sit back, watch the show, and let Julian expose every single one of his fatal flaws. Standing on the balcony, staring down at the city lights, I finally pieced together Julian's pathetic endgame. On one hand, he just couldn't let go of his toxic childhood obsession with Scarlett, and on the other, he was downright desperate for outside connections and cash to save his sinking family business. Meanwhile, Scarlett's dad ran a building materials empire that was absolutely flush with cash, boasting a massive network across the entire local scene. If that bastard could just marry into the Davis family, he would magically solve his romantic obsession and his financial ruin in one fell swoop. To everyone else, he was a high roller, decked out in designer clothes, driving a luxury car, and living the ultimate dream. But in reality, that flashy car was a rental, and his sharp wardrobe was nothing but a fragile facade holding up his shattered ego. Strip it all away, and he was nothing more than a cornered gambler with nowhere left to run. The Davis family and all our old classmates were completely blind to this truth. I was the only one staring right at his losing hand. Right around noon, the trouble hit, exactly like I knew it would. Scarlett's dad, Arthur Davis, called me up, his voice trembling with sheer panic. A legacy supplier they had trusted for years suddenly ghosted their orders out of nowhere, and their long-term logistics team cooked up some lame excuse to back out of their contract. In a single day, 2 massive operational partnerships just went up in smoke. With a tiny bit of digging, I quickly found out that both of those companies were deeply tied to Julian's family. Looking at their finances, it was a no-brainer. After crashing and burning at the dinner party, Julian decided to squeeze the Davis family dry, using cheap business tactics to break their resolve and drive a wedge between Scarlett and me. I calmed Mr. Davis down and told him I was taking full responsibility for the mess, telling him to keep his mouth shut, sit tight, and just watch the magic happen. Right after we hung up, I had Zach leak a few juicy rumors, publicly hinting that Raystone Capital was dying to expand into the building materials supply chain. Within a mere 2 hours, those same arrogant suppliers who tried to screw us over were begging at our doorstep, one by one, and every single one of their old contracts was magically restored. I didn't even have to lift a finger. I simply used our massive leverage in the venture capital world to give them a quiet but brutal reality check. Arthur Davis called me again that evening. When he realized the whole crisis had vanished, he was absolutely stunned. His entire tone did a 180-degree flip, showering me with praise and swearing up and down that no one would dare mess with me at the wedding. Just like that, Julian's pathetic scheme to crush us with his family's influence went up in flames. Now, that loser had exactly one card left to play, and I already knew exactly what his desperate move would be. He was definitely going to crash the wedding in person. He would make one last, dramatic play, in front of all our friends and family, betting his life that Scarlett still had feelings for him, and praying I would lose my cool in front of the whole crowd. But from the very start, that fool had bet his life on the wrong damn horse. At 11:30 p.m., on the night before the big day, I was sitting in the living room, double-checking the entire wedding itinerary, from the morning bridal pickup to the banquet reception, all the way down to the table-to-table toasts. As I crossed off every detail, Scarlett, wearing a loose, faded tee, wandered out of the bedroom barefoot. She curled her legs up on the sofa right beside me, taking one look at me and seeing right through the tension in a heartbeat, noting that with Julian's toxic, competitive ego, he would never take this loss lying down. He was absolutely going to crash our wedding. Having grown up with him, she knew his rotten core better than anyone. The guy couldn't stomach a loss, and he sure as hell couldn't let go of his sick obsessions. I just smiled and asked her what she wanted to do when he inevitably showed up to cause a scene. A sharp, merciless glint flashed in Scarlett's eyes as she coldly swore she would give him the most brutal reality check of his life. As we stayed up talking deep into the night, we finally laid all our cards on the table, baring our hearts to each other. I looked deep into her eyes and promised, "No matter what goes down tomorrow, I will protect you with my life." She wouldn't have to hold back or swallow a single ounce of disrespect from anyone. I was going to crush every problem myself. Once we wrapped up, I pulled out my phone and shot Zach a message, confirming our legal team had the Brighton Group divestment papers locked and loaded, along with every equity dissolution agreement ready to nuke their company the absolute second I gave the word. I told him to hold his horses, just sit tight and wait for the absolute perfect moment to strike. Zach even joked around, asking what kind of flashy suit I was wearing to the wedding. I just told him to keep a low profile, no need to make a scene yet. I tossed my phone on the couch and killed the living room lights. Outside my window, the city skyline glittered, a sprawling ocean of neon and restless energy. With all the pieces on the board firmly locked into place, I just had to wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow's wedding was going to put one hell of a definitive end to all the suffocating baggage of my past. Because tomorrow is my wedding day with Scarlett. Julian, if you actually have the guts to show your face, I'll gladly save you a front row seat. You can sit there and watch the curtains close on a war you lost a long, long time ago. At 7:30 a.m. sharp on the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, carefully straightening my tie. A sharp black suit paired with a crisp white shirt. It was simple, sure, but it commanded absolute respect. Zach had actually wanted to rent me a custom Armani suit just to flex, but I politely shot him down. Dressing like a peacock would only invite cheap gossip, but looking like a total slob, that would completely disappoint Scarlett. So, I compromised. I went with a premium domestic brand, reasonably priced, but incredibly sharp. Right as I was halfway through fixing the knot, my phone suddenly buzzed. It was Zach. "Bro, he's here." His voice was tight, practically vibrating with tension. My hands didn't skip a single beat. "Where?" I asked calmly. "The hotel parking lot." "He's sitting in that exact same Porsche Cayenne." Zach paused for a second, his tone turning weirdly baffled. "But, dude, he's wearing an all-white suit." I finished tightening my tie and smoothed down my collar, letting out a cold scoff in my mind. In a traditional wedding, some guy rolling up in an all-white suit? Yeah, that's absolutely no accident. That was a blatant, unapologetic declaration of war. He wasn't here to pop champagne and celebrate our marriage. He was here to object. He came to steal the bride right out from under everyone's noses. Where is he right now, I asked. Just sitting in his car down in the lot. He hasn't moved yet. Looks like the bastard's waiting for the ceremony to actually start. Let him wait, I replied, my voice completely deadpan. Bro, aren't you going to stop him? What if he literally rushes the stage? Why the hell would I stop him? I neatly folded my pocket square, checking my reflection in the mirror one last time. The star of today's show isn't me, and it sure as hell isn't him. Then who is it? Zach asked, totally lost. Scarlet. The other end of the line went dead silent for a couple of seconds before Zach finally muttered under his breath. Bro, are you actually this calm, or are you just faking it? Of course I'm calm. All right, man. I'll be on standby in the front lobby. I hung up the phone. At exactly 8 o'clock, the bridal procession rolled out, right on schedule. Arthur had borrowed 6 black Audis from his business buddies. They weren't insanely flashy, but they were perfectly uniform, giving off a solid, quietly powerful vibe. When we finally pulled up to Scarlett's house, the second Eleanor saw me standing at the door. Her eyes immediately welled up with tears. Gavin, she opened her mouth like she had 1,000 apologies to make, but I beat her to it. Today's a happy day. Don't cry. She hesitated, desperately wanting to say more. But in the end, she just reached out and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. It wasn't a tight grip, but she held on to me for a long, quiet moment. She didn't drop Julian's name once. I knew Arthur must have already sat her down and given her the talk. He definitely told her about the suppliers suddenly tearing up their contracts, about Julian secretly bleeding the Davis family business dry from the shadows, and how all it took was a single phone call from me to make every last one of those problems vanish into thin air. Eleanor wasn't an idiot. She had just been totally blinded by flashy, superficial garbage before. But now she finally saw the cold, hard truth. Then, Scarlett stepped out of the bedroom. She was wearing a traditional, deep crimson bridal gown, crowned with an exquisite golden headpiece. A few stray strands of hair tumbled softly down her temples. She looked, absolutely, breathtakingly beautiful. She usually despised heavy makeup, but today, the artist had given her a flawless, mesmerizing look. Her slender, perfectly arched eyebrows, her vibrant crimson lips, and that subtle touch of gold eyeliner at the corners of her eyes. It flawlessly blended her radiant beauty with this sharp, undeniable, regal elegance. Standing right there in the doorway, I was completely paralyzed by how gorgeous she was. I completely lost myself for a second. And no, that's not some cheesy exaggeration. I literally forgot how to breathe. My mind flatlined, and the air just locked up tight in my throat. What are you staring at? Are we leaving, or what? She pursed her lips, a playful, shy little smile in her voice. I cleared my throat. Let's go. The convoy slowly rolled its way back to the hotel. By 10:20 a.m., the main hall had already been transformed into a full-blown festive paradise, drowning in a stunning sea of crimson and gold. Every single table was overflowing with fresh flowers and sweet wedding favors. And right there, on the massive red backdrop hanging dead center over the stage, our names Gavin and Scarlett were beautifully embroidered, shining brilliantly for the whole world to see. About 80 to 90% of the 200-plus seats were packed. Guests were pouring in and signing the register, mingling around the stage and building up this incredibly hyped, lively atmosphere. My parents were beaming, sitting right there on the right side of the very front row. The old man was rocking his deep blue tunic suit, the exact one he strictly saved for massive occasions like New Year's. My mom was showing off a fresh perm, her face literally glowing with absolute, pure joy. Over on the left front row sat Arthur and Eleanor. Eleanor was clutching her handkerchief for dear life, her eyes all red and teary. The MC? Just some young guy one of Scarlett's coworkers had dragged in. But man, he was incredibly articulate. A few witty opening jokes right off the bat, and he had the whole venue buzzing. At 10:30 a.m. sharp, the wedding ceremony officially kicked off. The melodic music swelled through the room, and I stood up there on the stage, just waiting quietly. Those stage lights were a bit blinding, honestly, blurring the guests below into this dark sea of shadowy silhouettes. Then, suddenly, the heavy banquet hall doors slowly swung open. Scarlett, locking arms with Arthur, stepped down the red carpet, taking it one steady, breathtaking step at a time. The whole room stood up, every single pair of eyes glued right to her. She didn't rush. Every step she took was grounded and totally resolute. The train of her crimson gown swept across the floor, painting this gorgeous red arc right behind her. Reaching the front of the stage, Arthur finally let go of her arm and shot me this long, heavy look. It was a gaze loaded with a solemn promise, absolute trust, and just a hint of a father's reluctance to let go. I gave him a respectful, slight nod, and he quietly stepped down to the side. Scarlett stepped up, taking her place right beside me. I turned my head, leaning in to whisper, "Nervous. Don't you dare ask me that again." She immediately shot me a playful glare. All right, my bad. I won't ask," I whispered back with a smirk. The MC kept the show rolling, seamlessly moving on to the speeches from both sets of parents. When my mom walked up to the mic, she practically tripped over her own feet, sending this wave of warm, good-natured laughter rolling right through the crowd. Then, it was time for the main event, the exchange of the rings. My hands were shaking just a tiny bit, but Scarlett? Her hands were trembling way harder than mine. Just as we were about to slide those rings onto each other's fingers, a completely unwanted voice suddenly shattered the moment, bringing the whole ceremony to a brutal, grinding halt. Wait a minute. The entire room instantly flatlined into dead silence. Every single pair of eyes aggressively snapped toward the sound. Off in the distance, Julian, decked out in a ridiculous all-white suit, marched straight from the entrance toward our stage. Every single step he took screamed with this desperate, all-or-nothing kind of resolve. He kept getting closer and closer to us. When he was just 2 paces away, he slammed on the brakes. His gaze was burning with this manic, intense passion as he stared right at Scarlett. "I am worthy of you," he yelled, his voice actually cracking with emotion. A massive, collective gasp ripped right through the audience. Eleanor twisted her handkerchief into a tight, frantic little ball, while Arthur's face instantly drained to a violent, furious shade of ash. And me? I stayed planted in my spot, watching this whole circus play out with absolute, chilling calm, mentally, just taking notes on how insanely theatrical his dialogue was. Seriously, if this were a drama series, the live comment section would be absolutely melting down right now. But spoiler alert, this wasn't some trashy drama series. This was my actual, real-life wedding. The very second those words left his mouth, he aggressively shoved his right hand forward, palm facing up, fingers slightly parted, literally making an inviting gesture toward my bride. "Scarlett," he called out, his voice all raspy and dramatic. I swear there were even tears glistening in the corners of his eyes. Honestly, though, whether it was just the dramatic stage lighting or his actual genuine feelings, who the hell knew? "Come with me. Let's elope." Boom! Those 5 words dropped like a massive boulder crashing into a glass-still lake, instantly blowing up the entire banquet hall into pure, unadulterated chaos. Oh my God. Has he totally lost his mind? He is literally trying to steal the bride. This is completely out of line. Furious murmurs and shocked whispers spread like wildfire through the panicked crowd. Some people were literally standing on their toes to catch the drama, while others just covered their mouths, their eyes blown wide with pure shock. Back in the corner, a bunch of young guests didn't even hesitate. They whipped out their phones and started recording every juicy second of it. Eleanor was gripping Arthur's arm so fiercely her nails were probably digging straight into his flesh. I just stood there, casually staring at Scarlett's back. Her shoulders were completely rigid, insanely tense. The golden phoenix embroidered on her bridal gown was just glaring brilliantly under those harsh stage lights. Her head was dipped down just a bit, making it totally impossible for me to read her expression. Julian's hand was still just hanging there, frozen in midair. Time honestly felt like it had completely flatlined for 10 agonizing seconds. The air in the room got so thick and suffocating, it felt like taking a single breath was absolute torture. Then, suddenly, Scarlett finally moved. She slowly raised her head. She didn't even waste a single second, glancing at Julian's pathetic, outstretched hand, choosing to stare him dead in the eye instead. There was zero anger on her face, no sorrow, and absolutely, unequivocally zero hesitation. There was only this crystal clear, absolute, unshakable certainty shining in her eyes like she was just looking at some basic math problem she had already solved ages ago, while the fool was still desperately trying to figure it out. "Julian," she finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it pierced clearly through every single corner of the hall. "Let me say this one more time." Before the words could even fully leave her mouth, her right hand suddenly whipped upward with terrifying, blinding speed, right while that pathetic, expectant look was still plastered on Julian's face. His entire head was brutally snapped to the side. The sharp, echoing sound of a slap exploded through the air like a dry branch snapping under immense pressure, ringing out violently throughout the entire banquet hall. The entire room instantly fell into a dead, paralyzed silence. It was as if a massive bomb had just detonated, stunning everyone into absolute speechlessness. Every single sound completely vanished. A split second later came the sound of over 200 people simultaneously gasping for air. Julian's face remained whipped to the right for 3 long, frozen seconds. A violent, bright red handprint rapidly manifested across his left cheek, leaving the stark, brutal shape of 5 fingers perfectly visible. His hand remained awkwardly frozen in midair, leaving him looking completely paralyzed. Scarlet pulled her hand back, letting it drop to her side. Her lips parted slightly as she spat out a single command. "Get out!" It wasn't some hysterical, screaming screech. It was just a simple, flat demand, yet it carried far more lethal weight than any explosive tirade. Like a cold, ruthless dagger, it precisely pierced straight through Julian's final line of defense. Julian's hand finally dropped down, limp and utterly powerless. He parted his lips, seemingly desperate to say something, an explanation, an argument, or perhaps wanting to beg, "Come with me, just one last time." But Scarlet didn't give him a single chance. She turned around to face me, and our eyes locked. The rims of her eyes were glowing red, not from sadness, but because she had poured every single ounce of her strength into that slap. Her palm was still trembling slightly. I stood up, pushed back my chair, and walked right over to her. Taking her right hand, I gently unfurled it, only to find her palm completely flushed red, still radiating a burning heat. I lowered my head and blew a soft, soothing breath across her palm. "Does it hurt?" I asked softly. Tears welled up and swirled in her gorgeous eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let a single drop fall. Only the tip of her nose turned a faint, adorable pink. "It doesn't hurt. Liar. It really doesn't. Then let me ache for you." I wrapped her hand tightly within my own, using my own body heat to warm her. Then, I slowly turned my head to glare at Julian behind us. He was still frozen in place like an idiot, his left cheek already starting to swell into a nasty bruise. One of the buttons on his fancy white suit jacket had completely popped off from the sheer force of the impact, revealing the crumpled white shirt underneath. His gaze had completely shattered, entirely stripped of that high and mighty, arrogant confidence from just moments ago. All that remained was the bewildered, empty stare of a broken man whose grand illusions had been completely pulverized by a single slap. He actually thought Scarlet would waver. He thought his passionate little confession would touch the softest corner of her heart. He thought the phrase, "childhood sweetheart," carried enough weight to magically change her mind. What he never could have anticipated in a million years was that it would only earn him a resounding, humiliating slap and a freezing directive to get the hell out. The entire room remained dead silent for about 5 seconds, right until Eleanor's long-suppressed sobs finally broke the eerie quiet. These weren't tears of sadness, but a total, overwhelming release of built-up tension. She wept softly into her crumpled handkerchief, while Arthur gently wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders, his expression completely steady and resolute. Whispers began to erupt once more. Only this time, the tides had completely turned against the intruder. Serves him right. Crashing a wedding to steal the bride? How utterly embarrassing. Good for Scarlet. Trash like him really needs to be taught a lesson. Julian heard every single one of these hushed, biting remarks. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down anxiously, the nasty swelling on his face glaringly obvious under the bright stage lights. Yet, he didn't leave. Even after being brutally, publicly slapped, and despite the mocking, thoroughly contemptuous stares of the entire banquet room, he still stood there like a pathetic statue hollowed out of its very soul. He remained rooted to the spot, clenching his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. Slowly raising his bloodshot eyes, he fixed his gaze directly onto me. "Gavin." His voice was painfully raspy, making it completely impossible to tell if he was emotionally shattered or just desperately trying to maintain a dominant front. "Do you honestly think you've won?" I stood firmly by Scarlet's side, my fingers still tightly, lovingly interlaced with hers, my tone thoroughly calm and completely unbothered. Love was never about winning or losing. Of course, it sounds that way to a loser like you. Julian pulled his lips back into an ugly, mocking sneer. "At the end of the day, you have absolutely nothing. You drive a cheap, ordinary car, live in some cramped rental apartment, and scrape by on a pathetic, measly salary. What on earth makes you think you can give Scarlett a stable, carefree future? As his bitter words echoed out, the entire hall instantly fell dead silent once again. Everyone quietly watched the tense confrontation unfolding right on the main stage. He grew increasingly agitated, his words practically dripping with pure, unadulterated disdain. You think marriage is so simple, but the harsh reality of daily life actually requires a solid financial foundation. If Scarlett stays with a guy like you, she'll spend the rest of her life counting pennies, completely unable to even afford a decent car. That Porsche you're so incredibly proud of. I calmly spoke up, cutting him off mid-sentence. Julian froze in his tracks, his arrogant expression instantly faltering. What are you trying to say? That luxury Cayenne of yours was actually leased just 3 months ago from Apex Auto Finance. You pay $12,000 a month for it. You put down a $50,000 deposit, and the lease contract runs until the end of this December. Julian instantly locked up, his eyes widening in pure horror. He was completely at a loss for words. Leasing a car to keep up appearances isn't inherently shameful, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. But using a borrowed, glamorous facade to belittle someone else who is just building an honest life? Now that is incredibly pathetic. A few muffled, mocking snickers suddenly erupted through the dead, quiet banquet hall. Julian's face flushed a violent shade of crimson and then turned pale as ash. He was humiliated to the absolute extreme. How could you possibly know that? I know far more than you could ever imagine. I let go of Scarlett's hand. My steady, piercing gaze systematically dismantled his entire reality. Brighton Group lost $37 million last quarter. Your company's current cash flow can only keep operations running for 4 more months. Your father has already mortgaged your corporate headquarters building to secure a $20 million bridge loan just to stay afloat. Furthermore, out of the 3 major contracts for the North American project that you personally managed, 2 have already completely fallen through, one right after the other. With every single brutal fact I laid bare, Julian's face grew progressively paler. You didn't return home wrapped in glory and success. You rushed back in an absolute panic to look for a lifeline, because your family business is facing complete annihilation. Once those heavy words filled the room, the entire wedding venue fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Every single guest held their breath, not daring to make a single sound. Julian's entire body began to shake uncontrollably. This wasn't a tremor of rage, but the pure panicking humiliation of having every last bit of his fake facade ripped away, leaving him completely exposed and disgraced in front of everyone. There is absolutely no way you could have uncovered these corporate secrets. His voice stammered and broke. All of his former arrogant confidence was utterly drained. That's because Brighton Group's largest external institutional investor happens to be Raystone Capital. Julian's eyes flickered with a sudden, intense panic. I know Zach is the public face of Raystone Capital, but what does that have to do with you? Right at that exact moment, my phone began to ring. I answered the call and immediately switched it to speakerphone. Zach's voice echoed crisply throughout the entire silent banquet hall. Bro, all the divestment paperwork for Brighton Group has been finalized, and the official corporate seals have been stamped. Just say the word, and I'll send the files over to you immediately. Julian froze entirely, looking as though his very soul had been violently sucked right out of his body. Zach keeps calling you bro? He muttered to himself in disbelief. Everyone in the business world only knows one thing. Zach is the powerful managing partner of Raystone Capital. I took my phone away and spoke in a flat, even, and commanding tone. But what no one knows is that the actual founder behind that multi-million-dollar firm has always been me. After a heavy, profound silence lasting a full 5 seconds, the entire wedding venue erupted into absolute, unbridled chaos. A deafening wave of shocked gasps and frantic murmurs totally filled the massive hall. Arthur bolted upright from his seat in sheer disbelief, while Eleanor instantly stopped crying, staring forward in a completely stunned, wide-eyed gaze. Even my parents, sitting in the front row, began frantically whispering to each other, marveling at how incredibly low-key and humble I had always been. He was never one to flaunt his own immense power. Julian's legs went totally weak, and he nearly collapsed straight onto the floor, frantically reaching out to brace his trembling body against the sharp corner of a banquet table. His fingertips dragged across the tablecloth with a harsh, grating screech. The very last trace of color completely drained away from his face. His pristine, expensive white suit only made his complexion look completely lifeless and hollow. and amid the bright, festive red decorations filling the venue, he looked completely pathetic and out of place. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, utterly unable to accept this brutal, earth-shattering reality. Before this, he had been brimming with smug arrogance, believing his privileged background and success made him wildly superior. He had fully intended to use this grand wedding to look down on me and completely crush my spirit. Only now did it brutally dawn on him that his opponent was no insignificant nobody, but a towering existence he could never, ever hope to equal. No matter how much wealth or power he pulled together, all of his toxic pride, obsessions, and fake confidence came crashing down in ruins at this exact moment. His head hung low as he leaned powerlessly against the table, utterly unable to utter a single word of rebuttal. Scarlett didn't spare him a single, pitiful glance from beginning to end. Scarlett turned to the completely stunned MC, giving him a soft, reassuring nod to keep the ceremony moving. Shaking off his shock, the MC finally snapped back to reality and scrambled to get the itinerary back on track. Before the poor guy could even finish reading the vows, I eagerly blurted out, "I do," sending the entire room into a roar of cheerful laughter. Just like that, the heavy, suffocating tension that had choked the room seconds ago completely vanished. And when it was Scarlett's turn, she didn't hesitate for a single heartbeat before sealing the deal. Another massive wave of cheers and laughter rippled through the crowd, wrapping the entire banquet hall in a warm, triumphant glow. My new mother-in-law, Eleanor, wiped away happy tears with a radiant smile, while Arthur couldn't hide his own emotions, his eyes misting over with pride. The joyful, sweet melody of a traditional wedding march softly swelled in the background, completely washing away the last traces of the messy drama. Meanwhile, two burly hotel security guards stepped right up, politely but firmly showing Julian the exit. By now, that fiery, entitled arrogance he had strutted in with to steal my bride was completely gone. Looking totally defeated, he braced himself against a table just to stand, dragging his hollow, heavy feet, step by agonizing, step toward the banquet hall doors. When he reached the main entrance, he froze in his tracks, his knuckles turning totally white as he gripped the doorframe in pure despair. After a long, pathetic hesitation, he finally let go, vanishing into the shadows outside like a beaten stray dog. The insane drama was officially over. Scarlett laced her fingers tightly through mine, her gorgeous eyes overflowing with a deeply tender smile. "So, just how long were you planning to hide the fact that you're the actual founder of Raystone Capital?" "Ah, that? I honestly just never found the right time to bring it up. Well, this seems like the perfect moment." But before I could even reply, she playfully tapped my shoe with hers, a mischievous little spark dancing in her eyes as she teased, "You are absolutely doing all the dishes when we get home, Mr. Billionaire." That light-hearted banter sent the surrounding guests into another fit of roaring laughter. The rest of the reception went off without a hitch as we made our rounds, happily toasting at every single table. Relatives and friends practically swarmed me, their attitudes totally flipped from the sneering judgment they had shown just an hour ago. Now, they couldn't stop kissing up, praising me for being so incredibly humble and low-key. Even the snobbiest relatives who thought I was just some broke loser changed their tune, fawning over how grounded and capable I was. Even my new mother-in-law, Eleanor, grabbed my hands tightly, her face completely washed over with profound, heavy guilt. She openly admitted she had been narrow-minded and totally misjudged me, practically weeping with regret for not seeing my true worth right from the start. I just gave her a warm smile and softly reassured her, explaining that true wealth and status never actually needed to be flaunted. The wedding wrapped up beautifully, and the guests slowly trickled out. Soon, the sprawling banquet hall was empty, leaving behind only scattered chairs, tables, and a few leftover wedding favors. Exhausted but happy, Scarlett and I finally changed out of our heavy, elaborate wedding outfits and just collapsed side by side on the steps to catch our breath. She casually pulled off her heavy bridal crown, letting her stunning black hair cascade down her shoulders. Stripped of all that stiff, formal elegance, she looked breathtakingly relaxed and effortlessly beautiful. "You've been secretly running a multi-million-dollar firm for years, so why on earth do you still insist on driving that ancient Honda Civic every single day?" "I just think it's practical. And hey, it saves on gas. It's honestly more than enough for a daily commute." Smiling, I pulled out a fresh handkerchief and gently wiped away the faint beads of sweat lingering on her neck from the intense afternoon heat. She stared at me in total silence for a long moment. For a second, I thought she might actually be mad, but then she just reached out and gave my forehead a playful, gentle flick. "You are entirely too good at keeping secrets, mister. I swear I never intentionally hid a thing from you. You just never asked. Besides, we've been together through thick and thin. Did you seriously never think about using your massive family fortune to upgrade our lifestyle? Honestly, I just wanted you to love me for exactly who I am. I wanted you to love the guy who takes care of you every day, the Gavin whose entire world revolves completely around you, not some flashy, high-profile venture capitalist." That raw, heartfelt confession instantly melted away any lingering doubts, completely winning over Scarlett's heart. Without another word, she quietly rested her head against my shoulder, snuggling deep into my embrace. As the evening slowly deepened, it painted the entire sky. The final rays of the setting sun washed through the massive French windows, casting a warm golden amber glow over us, perfectly framing our two intertwined silhouettes in a moment of absolute, undisturbed peace and comfort. Just then, working silently in the background, my phone suddenly buzzed with a text from Zach. He informed me that the divestment paperwork had officially been served, and the Brighton Group had plunged into a total, catastrophic meltdown. Julian's father had frantically made dozens of desperate calls, practically begging on his knees to negotiate a settlement. But my team flatly rejected every single one. Karma hit hard. Even the flashy luxury car Julian had leased to show off was aggressively repossessed right on the spot by the rental agency. In the end, the arrogant homewrecker was reduced to sneaking away in a cheap, beat-up cab, swallowed whole by his own crushing humiliation. I gave the text one last indifferent glance before flipping my phone face down on the table, sliding it away to finally shut out the meaningless noise of the outside world. Julian had been so damn obsessed with turning love into a twisted game of winners and losers, but the arrogant fool had completely missed the point from day one. Real affection was never about comparing bank accounts or keeping some petty scoreboard of how many years you've known someone. It was always about the quiet, steady rhythm of daily life together, and that undeniable, unshakable choice to always put each other first. 2 weeks later, I flew Scarlett out to Maui to finally kick off our incredibly relaxing honeymoon. Out there on a breathtaking, private white sand beach, Scarlett lounged lazily on a sun chair, casually flipping through a magazine while I sat right there beside her, obsessively slathering on another layer of sunscreen for her. After dealing with me doing this a few times, she finally couldn't help but playfully tease me for hovering over her like a nag. Our laughter and easy banter drifted down the quiet shore. The crisp ocean breeze, carrying that sharp, salty scent of the sea, blended perfectly with the intoxicatingly sweet smell of coconut warming on her skin. In that moment, everything just felt so unbelievably peaceful and right. It wasn't long before Zach shot me another text update, letting me know that Brighton Group had officially filed for bankruptcy protection and a massive restructuring. Julian had been brutally and completely ousted from his family's inner circle. The once arrogant heir was now reduced to desperately hunting for ordinary, minimum-wage jobs just to scrape together enough cash to survive. I read the pathetic update without feeling a single ounce of pity, then locked my phone and put it away for good. All my attention shifted right back to Scarlett, who was now playfully whining about wanting a fresh coconut to drink. She kept teasing me with this impossibly sweet, pouty smile that I could never say no to. I just smiled, pulled myself up from my chair, and started making my way down the boardwalk toward a little seaside shack, admiring her gorgeous silhouette walking just ahead of me. Bathed in the gorgeous, fiery golden glow of the setting sun, my chest swelled with absolute, undeniable peace. All those toxic obsessions over old flames and the exhausting baggage of childhood sweethearts had finally scattered into the wind, erased forever, because absolutely no amount of superficial wealth or lingering ghosts of the past could ever hold a candle to the incredible woman who loves me with everything she has. And I know, without a single doubt, that I will always be standing right here, happily waiting for her to run straight back into my arms.